Hello and welcome back to the season 1 finale of Can We Get a Minute, where we decode an education policy question so you don't have to. We have a very special guest today, and we're going to jump in with our final question of season 1.
I don't think it's any secret that tests are a hot topic. I hear about this from parents constantly, but also other teachers, and there's a lot on social media around testing. It's hard to decipher all of this while I have my own questions and concerns. Could you talk about school tests, what's actually required, and generally just what's going on with testing?
Ooh, this is a good question.
We saved a good one for last.
Or did we save the hardest one for last? I'm not sure.
But this is why we brought in an expert to help us navigate.
So not only did we bring in our favorite colleague, Ann Hyslop, but we also brought in one of the foremost experts in the nation on this issue. We're really lucky to work with someone who's so #famous. But let me turn it over to Ann so she can introduce herself.
Y'all are too kind. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Hi, I'm Ann Hyslop, the Policy Director of Policy Development at All for Ed with these fabulous two ladies. And I do a lot of work on assessments, accountability, school improvement, Title I. I worked at the U.S. Department of Education for a couple years in the Obama administration, right when No Child Left Behind was being rewritten and replaced by the Every Student Succeeds Act. So a lot of my work since then has been trying to ensure that the law is implemented in a way that fulfills its civil rights legacy and is really ensuring that students who are the furthest from opportunity are getting the resources and supports they need to thrive. So I'm really happy.
Love it. And so when we said we were bringing in an expert, like
obviously,
literally. Very cool. So, Ann, I'd love to start with where where we all started back in high school. We were taking tons of tests. And I would love to hear from you all, what's an item of clothing that you loved in high school that now you are so embarrassed of? And I can start so you can think of your embarrassing stories.
Tell us.
So I remember I was maybe perhaps had very strict parents and I wasn't allowed to wear heels. But then finally I was at Payless, which RIP to Payless, with my mom, and she let me buy a pair of heels. And looking back, they were so ugly. And the heel was like this big. It was nothing. But I thought I was doing something incredible.
And I remember the first
time I wore exactly. I remember the first time I wore them, I had a chorus concert and I just felt like I was floating. Now, did my feet hurt at the end of the day? Absolutely. But did I then go on to pretty much only wear heels in school? Absolutely, yes.
Excuse you, a woman is here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I thought in middle school, I always felt like such an awkward kid. And so in high school, I got this kind of burst of confidence where I'm coming into my fashion, my fashion self. And it got pretty wild there for a while. I had, at one point I had a pair of pants that were like a garish red plaid. I'm pretty sure I bought them from Hot Topic.
I'm using these pants. I feel like I know these pants.
I'm certain I bought them from Hot Topic. You probably saw them in the mall. But probably my wildest creation, I had this denim. It was not a bodysuit, but it looked like a bodysuit. It was a denim shirt with a cap sleeve that tucked into a pair of jeans, but not jeans. These were those skinny jeans before skinny jeans were doing skinny jeans. Okay. So it was one big denim outfit. And then I had this hat that was I can't even describe it because it's so stupid. It wouldn't even exist anymore. I would have been arrested. Okay, so it was when you see old men and those golf caps that fold forward. It was kind of like that, but it was a macrame, a beige macrame type of crochet. So it was kind of see-through, and I would wear it off to the side. And absolutely wild, but I can't even figure out.
Yeah,
there has got to be somewhere, because I wore this outfit a lot, because this was if I woke up in the morning and I was today's gonna be a good day, this is what I was putting on.
You're feeling yourself that day.
Yeah, I was so people were Jen's really feeling it. And I will say to a note on like fashion of the day, I got a number of compliments on this outfit. So it was like a collective, problem, right? Because
Didn't
people
Christina
weren't-
Aguilera have a hat like that?
I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure I purchased this because it was like hot at the moment. But looking back, I'm like, what was I actually doing? Like someone needed to get involved. Like, but I absolutely believe Christina Aguilera probably had that exact outfit. That's probably why I bought it.
Yeah.
Like I was like straight from Christina Aguilera to Jennifer Ellis in Vancouver, Washington. Like the people need to see it. But yeah, that's got to be it.
So the crazy thing, of course, is I think back to what I wore in high school, and I think the fashion it was not great. There were questionable choices made, but also all of it is now popular.
It's coming back around.
Like
Yeah.
Gen Z is wearing my high school wardrobe. So the things that I thought were like super cool and now I think are very cringe are maybe like cool again. So one, denim overalls. Loved I was a very big like Gap girly. Apparently Gap is back too.
Gap is
Remember,
back.
the wing dance commercials and like who knew? And so I had my Gap denim overalls that I love to wear with like different colored like t-shirts underneath. I had the Steve Madden black wedge slides where it was just like a sandal there, open toed, and then one band
yes, those
material that you would roll your ankle you were basically just asking to break something and fall down by wearing these shoes, and they would like flip flop behind you in a really satisfying way when you walk down the hall. That was another big popular item for me. I also like wore Birkenstocks all the time. I still wear Birkenstocks all the time. So like Birkenstocks were very popular. I am not ashamed of those. But I also will say I went to a private school with a pretty strict dress code, K-12. So like I wasn't even allowed to wear the jean overalls I love so much most days, except when we had like a pep rally or something special, or I came back to school for something like after hours for a play practice or the newspaper or something like that. But because of that, when I got to college, I was like,
oh no,
I can wear whatever I want. The thing that I insisted on wearing, and it was like my favorite clothing item of clothing when I first went to college, I kid you not, a pair of Dr. Scrubs. I wore like new Dr. Scrub pants. I think I even wore them to like the official convocation. Like freshman year.
I remember there was a thing though where it was like pajama pants and Dr. Scrubs, and that was like the hot
it was
look.
that year. It was like, just the scrubs, and I would wear like a white t-shirt or tank top with it and be like, this is my like I can wear whatever I want now. I don't have to wear like no spaghetti straps, no, skirts that are like go down to your ankles or whatever they were. It was freeing. It was very freeing. That it also then meant that my fashion changed dramatically. I think by the time I finished college, it kind of came back around. But the freshman year was also some questionable choices.
That is so funny. Wow, I've learned so much about both of you. It all tracks though. It all tracks.
So getting into our conversation for the day, I don't think it's a secret that assessments have been kind of in the hot seat for a while now. And I think there are a lot of misconceptions about assessment. There's a lot of opinions about assessment, but I don't know that a lot of the conversation, like some of these conversations have spun out, like where it's not even fact-based anymore. People are talking about so many things when they talk about assessment. Sometimes we're not even talking about assessment. It's like the vehicle that a number of other things are riding in on. So I'm not surprised to have this question here, but let's just talk about, and how did we get here? Because I don't feel like the question of kids taking tests to show where they're learning in schools, it's not like in the history of humankind, this has always been a controversial topic. Like, how did we get to this moment where this is such a controversial question?
That's absolutely right. So like you can read like Little House on the Prairie. I'm pretty sure they were taking assessments back in Little House on the Prairie, the one-room schoolhouse. We were needing to assess how students were doing, whether they had learned content, whether they were ready for the next grade or the next level, or whether you need to go back and reinforce skills. Like that is something that educators have been doing as long as there have been educators.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think that is often when folks are talking about assessment, though, like classroom assessment isn't what they're focused on,
Mhm.
even though the majority of assessments are classroom assessments developed by teachers.
Mhm.
Like if you're a student, that's the majority of the tests that you take. They're more focused on the assessments that are required by either school districts or by the state, in some cases from the federal government, that are these large scale, standardized, common assessments that all students who meet certain criteria are
Yeah.
required to take.
Mhm.
And I think over time, there have been more and more requirements for that and more uses of those assessments. And some of those uses have been controversial, in some cases wrong. Like, I don't think we need to be shy about the fact that
Mhm.
when the SAT was first developed,
Yeah.
it was to like keep certain people out of higher education.
Right.
So like that is true. I don't think right now, if you look at how the SAT is used in higher education admissions, it's often helping students who maybe didn't have APs and advanced classes in their high schools, like showing that actually they are some of the best and brightest students in the country
Yeah.
and deserve to go to these, very elite institutions that are hard to get into. But that's the legacy of it.
Yeah.
And I think, you think through the assessments that are used in many cases. I think the ones everyone is most familiar with are those state end of year tests, the ones that your state agency requires you to give. That really, there is now a federal requirement to give them. Since No Child Left Behind passed in 2001, so for the past 25 years, basically,
Mhm.
every student has been required to be assessed in grades 3 through 8 in reading and math. And that wasn't the case before, and I think I just also want to be like, why does that matter? Because before 2001, we couldn't tell you if Black and white students were achieving at similar levels in a school. We didn't know that. Like, I couldn't tell you at your local high school or your local elementary school how English learners were doing compared to non-English learners. We just didn't have that data.
Yeah.
We were only assessing kids in a common way statewide where we had like apples to apples comparisons, maybe once every grade span. And often the data were not reported at that level where you could actually compare student group, which is kind of wild. I think like we have forgotten, like that's not that long ago.
Right.
Mhm.
My lifetime.
Right. All of ours.
Our younger listeners, they may not remember that, but like I couldn't tell you what the achievement gap may have been in a school between Latino and white students, or between your students who come from low income backgrounds compared to your wealthier students. We just didn't know that. We were operating in a vacuum. And I think those tests became controversial in many cases because of how they were used.
Yeah.
I think in some ways because seeing bad data, seeing those gaps is hard. It's hard to grapple with that. And I think district leaders, state leaders often don't like being called out when they have large achievement gaps, but also because of some of the accountability policies. You may be in a state that gives an A through F grade to schools based on how, in part, those test scores.
Yeah.
And that's
Dan, can you explain that a little bit? So, when I was teaching, which was not that long ago in like this world, but was in this era, I purposefully did not teach a grade that had testing, and we can talk about that later. But I thought I was being told that that these tests were required. First of all, the kids were taking way more tests than math and reading. So I'm confused by that. Not now, but I was then. But also we were being told that these were like those A through F grades meant things like, our school could get shut down, or like kids could get moved out of our building. What is really the things that were the point behind those grades, and who decided those things too? That would be really helpful to know.
Very, very good question, Rebecca. So, I think ultimately all that federal law requires, I think ultimately this is a federal requirement that every state in grade 3 through 8 each year give an assessment to all students in reading and in math that's aligned to the state's standards for that grade level. And then they have to give a similar assessment once in high school. So high school students don't have to take the test every year, just one time. There's also a federal requirement for there to be a science assessment, but that's only once in each grade span. So once in elementary, once in middle, and once in high school. The federal law also requires that state test results, in part, it's one measure that's used to identify whether schools need extra supports and resources. So that could be because the whole school is struggling, or maybe just a particular group of students is not doing particularly well. But it's not just looking at tests. It's also looking at things like graduation rates or academic growth, the progress of English learners in acquiring English language skills. You can look at chronic absenteeism. You can look at student performance in advanced coursework in high school. There's other factors that can be in play. So it's not just based on assessments. And then critically, if a school is identified as low performing, that doesn't mean that the school is shut down. That doesn't mean that educators lose their jobs. It doesn't mean that principals lose their jobs. It means that there's a school improvement plan to help the students who are struggling in the school. And the way that that is implemented is all up to states and districts. So some states have chosen to say, we're also going to put a letter grade on all of our schools. Some states have said, we're going to give them a Yelp-like 1 to 5 star rating. They have the Yelp system. Other states just say, kind of like those report cards you may have gotten in elementary school, like needs improvement or satisfactory. Like they put these descriptive labels on it, but that's all a state choice, So I don't want to say that there aren't some places and some educators out there might be like, well, in my state, if we don't do well on state tests, we could become a charter school. Well, if that is a state policy decision, it is not a federal decision. So I think it can be really confusing to understand the source of why are we doing this? Because you think of this as a federal testing requirement, but a lot of the ways that tests are used are state decisions. Sometimes they're local decisions. So if it's in order to get into the gifted and talented program in our district, we kind of look at this test. That's not a federal requirement. That's probably not a state requirement. That's probably your school district saying that's how we're using this test. And you're so right, Rebecca, too. There are a ton of tests that are given that are not those federal tests. So in order to prepare us for the state test, we're going to do these interim tests. That's a choice that a state or a district makes. Or, we want there to be social studies tests in addition to science and English and math. That's a state or a district choice. So untangling this can be really complicated. And in many cases, too, it means that students are taking many, many, many more assessments than what's required by the federal law, because states and districts have decided to add additional assessments for different purposes. Maybe it's to help get a sense of where students are mid-year, to have a mid-year check-in. Maybe it's because they want to get information on particular groups of students. I think we should definitely say, if a student is an English learner, they are probably being assessed more than a student who is not an English learner, because you're trying to see if they are acquiring those critical language skills that are necessary for them. Or, students are screened for certain disabilities. That's an assessment too. So students are getting assessments all the time, but they have all these different purposes. And I think one of the things that I whenever I'm talking about this issue too, is it's really helpful for districts to be looking at all the assessments they give and be sure that all of them are coherent. Do they all work together? Are all of these actually necessary? Are we giving an interim assessment that's supposed to give us a gauge, of if a student in January is kind of on track to be mastering grade level content? So we can say at the end of, we're going to check halfway through fourth grade to see if you're on track to be reading at a fourth grade level by the end of the year. But if that assessment that you're giving in January does not sync up or match up with the content that you measured in June, why are you giving that January test? Don't.
Right.
Yeah.
I think often when you're a teacher and you're just the one who's administering all these assessments, it can feel like you're looking at a kaleidoscope, like a funhouse.
Yeah.
I don't see how all of this fits together. And some of that is just because things have been added over time and you end up with this whole system that's not really working together. And it's important, I think, to think about how can we build an assessment structure where all of these different assessments for all the different purposes that they're using fit together.
Yeah. I think this is, we talked about at the top of the season how one of the purposes for unpacking some of the ed policies we wanted is just how complex they are, and how I think sometimes in the cultural conversation, we've gotten this very like, yes, no, right, wrong, like dichotomy. And I think assessments are one area where the way that it's being discussed right now, like people are like, are you for assessments? Are you against assessments? And like you just said, Anne, there's like this whole complex world where it's like, there's the policy, there's the intentions of the policy, there's the good data that we get, there are the civil rights and, student support aspects of that data. And then there's also this question of like, things being implemented a certain way, things being added onto assessments, or like, you get to the point where teachers are saying, I feel like I'm teaching to the test. Well, to me, that's really more a reflection of what's going on in your state, where they've created a structure that teachers feel if they don't perform a certain way, or if the school doesn't perform, like you said, Rebecca, like there'll be these negative consequences. When like, if you look at just the letter of the law, the assessment wasn't intended to be the finish line. It was it was intended to be one snapshot where we could say, okay, how's everyone doing? And then we could funnel resources where we realized they were needed. That is a judgment neutral policy. But then I do think when you look at some of these state policies, you're right, Anne, you're like, oh, well, that one's not a judgment neutral. But like, so I see where that then rolls out. I also see where educators, feel they're stuck in the middle. Like, it's like that thing where they are the face to parents and parents are coming in saying, I don't make you to take these assessments. And truly to our classroom educators listening, I know you cannot go change. Like you're not like, okay, I'll just wait. Like you cannot do anything about that. So it puts you in a very difficult position. And so I think that's where a lot of the emotion around this comes from. I guess, what would you say, Anne, educators who feel themselves squeezed in that space, where are there spots that they can advocate? Where are there things being done in assessments like that they could get in the mix of if they're saying like the culture around it is so negative in my state? Like, what are the levers of change that they can actually be impactful on in turning that around?
Yeah, no, I think that there are a lot of things that can be done. I think where educators can play a really critical role in this. I think one piece like actually starts a little bit with just what's the culture of assessment or testing season in your school. Like, are you hosting an assessment pep rally? Do we really need to have an assessment pep rally? Like, just treat it like another day. Like, I know we want students to take it seriously. We want them to show up. Like, that's important. But, making it feel like something that you really need to like have a pep rally for, like that can make some students feel really nervous or like this is a really big deal, or like this must really matter to like my school or my teacher, or, like their job, or whether we get money, or all of that. Where it's not just like, hey, we're taking this assessment, it's a chance to show what you've learned. Like it ramps that up. So I think there can be things even with how assessment, like the assessment culture at your school, that teachers have a huge role in. Also, the way that you talk about assessment data and how it's used, how you can communicate it to parents, how you explain that. I think often the data is coming back, months and months and months and months later. That's a real problem. Are there things that we could do to speed that up?
Yeah.
Or to explain this in formats that are more understandable. You're often going to be walking through assessment results with a student that you didn't teach when they were taking that test. Like you're walking through last year's results with parents in the fall. Yeah. So like, how can you think about making that experience something where it's not just like presenting information to parents. Like you have a really critical role, I think, as educators in explaining that data and explaining to parents what it means for them.
Yeah.
I think you can so often be like, well, what can I do? So what? The answer to so what? There's also, though, I think even bigger things that a lot of teachers can do when it comes to state assessments and these sort of more summative end of year tests. All of the items are typically vetted or like run or often developed by teachers. So getting involved in like your state's often called like a technical assistance committee or TAC. If they're like teacher leaders, like that's a place where you actually then can have a seat at the table when assessments are being developed, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different roles here.
And that's interesting. But you used a word here. You said summative assessment. And I know that there's a lot of confusion out there. Like, what is this? Like, what's summative assessment? What's a formative assessment? What are the things that we're actually saying that we want to see to be able to like look across states and districts, etc.?
Yeah.
No. So summative is what we think of in like your year end big like state assessment that's given, because it's summing up basically like what a student has learned in that course or in that year. And is really meant to, I think, not so much drive daily instruction, but to give a clear sense of like that check-in, that snapshot of where a student was in their learning at a particular point in time. And it's really, in particular, useful for parents, I think, kind of as a gut check on, okay, I'm getting my student's report card. I see what they're learning in their classes, but this is like another outside check on how they're doing. It's also really useful for district leaders, I think, and for state leaders to know, like, oh, well, we're seeing that we're having a really big problem with our elementary school reading. Is that because our state curriculum and the curriculum materials we're suggesting are not aligned with our assessments? Is there different professional development or instructional supports we need to be providing? So it can be really useful from a like macro resource allocation perspective about where a state or a district needs to focus. Formative assessments are like the other end of the spectrum. They are the light touch, daily classroom, usually like teacher developed tests that are given to just gauge, did that student catch that lesson? Are there things I need to go back and reinforce with that? Can I move on to the next thing? That's what a formative assessment is doing. It's really to inform classroom instruction on the daily. And it doesn't need to have the same, processes and standardization that you need in that big summative assessment, where you do need an assessment that can be compared from student to student, from school to school, from district to district, so you can make those judgments. And like, you need to be sure that it's developed in a way where there's like test security procedures and like the development process needs to be a little bit more rigorous. The scoring processes need to be more rigorous. Formative assessments are not that. They're just your, like, let's check in with students and how they are.
Yeah.
So,
and what do you say to people who are like, well, we could just use the formative assessments to see how our kids are doing. We don't need the summative one.
So I think formative assessments play a really critical role in teaching and learning and assessing students. Like that is why they are the basis of student report cards and progress. But it's not enough. I think one piece of this is that, and I think educators intuitively know this, like even within a school building, you may have, multiple sections of U.S. history or multiple sections of 5th grade, and they're not all teaching the same things on a different day. Like they're covering different content, different lessons. And so there's no way to really compare apples to apples again, where students are. And, just as like we go to the doctor for our checkup, like that's kind of what the state assessment is at the end of the year, checkup, to just see like, we think that everything's going okay. It seems like they've had a good year, but like, let's just verify, check in, and, be sure that we have a sense of, not just if students from classroom to classroom, but actually like our school compared to the school that's 3 blocks away. And we need that consistent picture. And the other thing I often hear too, it's not just like, could we use the formative tests? that, are useful for some purposes, but like are not useful for that like apples to apples comparison, or for these resource allocation decisions that like a district may need to make. But I also hear that the NAEP, which is the like Nations Report Card Assessment, could be used instead of the state test.
Well, why can't we?
Also say no. That is also no. You're interchangeable. That Nations Report Card, I think it's been on people's mind because the results came back just in January from the most recent one. Yeah. That assessment isn't able to produce school level data. It doesn't even produce district level data.
Yeah.
So the NAEP only tells you how a state is doing, and it's only in grade 4 and grade 8. So it's not enough information to really then be able to say like, hey, in this high school, students are knocking it out of the park. But in this high school, just a few blocks away, we're seeing students not graduating, students not going on to post-secondary education. What is happening here?
Yeah.
They would not be able to tell us that. So I think, as frustrating as it can be to like have so many different assessments, they all serve different purposes.
Right.
It's like, what's her face? Elizabeth Holmes, Theranos was like, 1 drop of blood. That's how it works. That was a lie.
It's like, don't be the Theranos of school. I do think like a lot of what I've heard, from people in the field is you get these refrains of like, the assessments, they stress out the educators, but particularly they stress out the students. And the thing that always catches me on this is like, the students are going to react. The students don't have context for the assessment before they encounter it. So they're going to react as the adults have signaled they should react. I don't just mean the things the adults are saying, but like you talked about earlier, Anne, if you have a school culture where you're doing like a bunch of practice tests and a pep rally and if there's a lot of pressure on the test, then yeah, they're going to be like, I am entering into a high pressure situation. But the assessment in itself does not have to be a high pressure situation. So again, that's to me one thing that I'm like, it's real, it's valid. Like when people say that, I'm like, I'm not trying to discount it at all because it's real, it's serious, but it's also not directly tied to what's required in the law. And so to me, I think one of the things I'm always trying to do in policy, and particularly ed policy because it's so complex, is like when we find a problem, it's like we also have to peg that problem into like, where did it happen in the pipeline? And it's not always that the underlying policy doesn't have good intention or can't be effective, but it's like, what happened where we got here? Because one thing I know we have talked about, the three of us, is like, for good or bad, a lot of our opportunities, and this is after K-12, are still docked to assessment. So I went to law school, I had to take the LSAT. And like I said, like Anne, you pointed it at the beginning, which I think is so important. A lot of these tests have not great history, let's say, and have had to be reworked. And I think there's still miles to go on that, right? But the reality is our kids, when they graduate, are still going, this isn't the end of their history of assessment. Even in a lot of jobs, if you're like in a trade or credential, there's like regular tests and assessment that come up. Sometimes there's a hands-on component, sometimes a written component, even to get your driver's license. Right. So assessments don't need to be this ugly word, but to the extent people are saying, teachers are saying like, my kids in the class are so stressed about it. Like, one, I 100% believe you, but two, I'm like, well, we need to fix that, but that doesn't necessarily mean we can't have any assessment. And I think that's where I want to put like some nuance into this conversation about, like I said, the importance of data is here. The importance of our kids' mental health, also critically important, but like we could live in a world where these two can exist together.
Yeah. And not to get into like child development and like those sorts of theories, but some of that, frankly, is the students are reacting to the stress of adults around them.
Absolutely.
And, I know that for me, like as a Montessori teacher, and we talked a lot about in our training how you have to walk into the space that you're in, because what you're carrying, your students will feel. So you have to let all the stuff go, right? Like you got to fight with someone, you got to let it go. Like you walk into that space as much of a blank slate as you possibly can. And that's really like, it is one of the hardest parts of being an educator. Yeah. But a lot of times our educators, and I know what, like I said earlier, I chose not to teach a grade that was tested intentionally, because I was terrified that because I was working in a district, and at the time, your ability to get a bonus, and let me tell you, when you're a teacher, like a $5,000 bonus is a big deal. And in my district, it was up to $25,000, was tied to your test scores if you were in a testing grade.
Wow.
For me, it was tied to like a couple of observations. So I got to like show up really great 3 times and get something. Or at least I tried to. For some people, it was a couple of days of the year, and it was like that is just incredibly unfair. But they were carrying so much stress that then their students felt as well.
Yeah.
No, I think we often hear the phrase like high stakes testing, and I want to be high stakes for who?
Right.
Like, really tell me what stakes are, and I don't want to discount, like sometimes there actually are quite high stakes for individual students. Like, you know, it's obviously like the SAT and the ACT, more schools have gone test optional, but like that when it was required, or if it still is required in your state, like that is a high stakes assessment for a student. But many of the tests that we take actually have no stakes for students in them.
Yeah.
But I think that stress that maybe educators are feeling, particularly if they are in a state or district that has chosen to have some kind of evaluation or bonus system that's tied to assessment results, like that can be transferred onto students. Or even when that is not the case and there is no direct like teacher stake, I think there still can be this impression of, well, if we don't do well, our school will suffer, we might lose money.
Yeah.
That should not be the case. If it is the case, like, please, like, write us. We will like rail against like your school laws.
Yeah.
That shouldn't happen. Like, you should be getting more resources. Like, you know, we want to help. But like really getting to the root of like, or is this like your superintendent is worried for his job? Like, I hope your superintendent is worried for his job if there's like huge achievement gaps. Like that is a problem. I do want to hold
that's on them, not on you as a classroom teacher.
Yeah.
It's not only the principal, it's not like I want to hold the adults, and particularly those that are like in our central offices or on our school boards or like in state houses, like their responsibility for resourcing and supporting schools and students and educators. Like that's really ultimately where we have this at the highest level, like what we should be using assessments for.
Absolutely.
And I do want to come back to like to one other thing just that triggered as you were talking just now on the like difference between formative and summative. And I think one of the things that we just need to like bear in mind too, where like there is a lot of concern, I think, given honestly like the racist history of some of these assessments when we talked about the SAT before, that like right now, these big standardized assessments that are typically given at the end of the year, those assessments go through a rigorous review process where the content is screened for bias to be sure that it is culturally inclusive. And a lot of states have done really, really smart work in this space to be sure that like this question actually, like if you don't have this prior background knowledge or come from this sort of culture, like you're not going to be able to access that question. That doesn't, so like it gets flagged, it's taken out of the assessment. Formative assessments that teachers give do not have those same checks on them. So I think that that's another really critical point here is like we are actually doing more on the summative end of year state test side to be sure that they are free from bias than we are in any other kind of assessment.
Oh my gosh, Anne, that is such a good point. And an anecdote to share, when I was teaching for littles, when they're learning how to read, sometimes you give them nonsense words so you can see if they like can sound them out. And there was this word DOS. And like one of you, can you tell me what that would sound out to be?
Dose?
D-O. Okay, well thank you. Exactly. So, right. But Anne, you did exactly what you did. Perfect. You did exactly what I needed you to do. Jen, you answered it in the way that would be check. You did it. You did it right. And because you're a native English speaker, so you said like you sounded it out in that way. Now Anne said it because to her it's not a nonsense word, it's a word she knows from Spanish. And so for me, if I'm giving the assessment, I have to mark you as wrong when actually you're showing me something really incredible. And if I don't know that, and it's not like on me as an educator, I mean, like I happen to know this, but like it's not on every educator to know that, where someone who, like a team of people who go through this process, who have different perspectives, are looking at these big summative assessments, they're going to hopefully catch something like that. And that's why that's so important.
Yeah. I think this is I was excited to take on this hot topic because, like I said, I think that it's in like this is a conversation, like a debate that's happening, like any internet chat board on education. You're here to find you if you are like, I want to have a fight with someone about assessment. Like I can put you into that in the next 3 minutes. But I think this is one of those things that is so interesting in policy, where it's like we can't even fully have an opinion until we understand all the different pieces that something goes through till it actually gets out into the classroom. And now, once we're able to lay it out and see it clearly, we can say, oh, here's where this state policy went off the rails, or here's where this created incentives that are having a really detrimental impact on school culture, the classroom culture, student mental health. And then we can directly address those things. I think about, we have our dog has been vomiting all over our house. And, I'm not going to like get rid of the whole dog because like we love our dog. But we had to like become detectives. And, long story short, our toddler has been feeding her Teddy Grahams. So, we have to stop the Teddy Graham pipeline to stop the vomiting. But it's like, you have to almost think about this whole system in a really holistic way. And I don't blame our educators who are literally on the front lines, hearing it from principals, district leaders, parents, their own misgivings about things they might be seeing. And so I just think it's like, this is one that's so, so complicated. But I do think this is also a space where we need to have a very nuanced, complex conversation, which doesn't mean everyone can't participate. We can have like very plain English, on the ground, nuanced conversations. But we can say summative assessments create this very critical data function with information that we need. And we can also say there are places in our country, whether they be district school, specific schools or states, where the summative assessment culture around that summative assessment has created really negative incentives or has created really big problems. Yeah. And we can work on those two things. Like we don't have to say, it's spun off the rails right here, and therefore we have to cancel all tests. We can say there's too many tests going over here, but we still want one summative test to get, this is this. We want it to be maybe lower stakes. We want it to, like, these are all variations of a conversation, and people can have different opinions upon this spectrum, which I think is important, particularly for educators to get in a room and actually be able to look at this in the light of day and express opinions about what they're seeing in their classroom. And I think the more educator voice and experience we have in this conversation, the stronger our assessment system is going to be, the better it's going to be at the end of the day.
Agreed. Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think, you can hold both of those things in your head at once and say, like, I believe in summative assessment. I believe in the importance of these assessments. I also believe they can be better. Yeah. Like both things are true. One of the papers that I wrote, over 10 years ago now at this point that like keeps coming up is one called The Case Against Exit Exams. Like I believe in summative statewide comparable assessment data every year, grades 3 to 8 in English and in math, like full stop. I believe in that once in high school. But I also have real misgivings when a single assessment is the determining factor of whether a student can graduate high school or not. Like how we use this data, like I generally think that assessment should always be one of multiple factors. Like it is not the sole thing that says a student is in a gifted program or not, or a student gets a diploma or not, particularly when it comes to students. And I think that like both those things can be true. And we can also say like summative assessment matters, but let's make it better. Like, why are we getting the results in November? Could we get them in September? What about July? That would be even better. And there are things that do that. Like, I just want to be clear that like there's some great work that's been done tracking when states release their assessment results. And there's some that get them out like as early as July, and some where it's November and December. Yeah. If you're a November and December state, like you should be complaining. It could be like, that's ridiculous. I think there are new assessments that are really cool. Like, I think we tend to think about assessments being like the Scantron bubble tests of old.
Okay, but I love a Scantron test.
I mean, I think as a teacher, they're also easier to grade. I know, like, a lot of my college professors were like Scantron only, and I think that was the way they did it. But there are assessments. Most of the assessments now that states are giving are asking students to engage with real life problems and write like long form responses. And the technology that we have enables those types of assessments to be given on a large scale and to be scored relatively quickly.
Yeah.
There also are where I mentioned like the NAEP assessment. I'm pretty sure the NAEP science assessment, like they actually mail science kits.
No way. That's so cool.
Experiments is actually like part of the test.
Wow.
Yeah.
So thinking about like ways that you can have more, the test feels more like what students are doing in the daily classroom. Like there are things that are possible now with technologies as we're improving that weren't possible before. Those things do cost money. I don't want to say like we can get a better assessment, but also spend less. I don't think we can hold those two things to be true at the same time.
Yeah.
We probably won't have to invest in that. But there is room for improvement too. And I think that just by saying like we want to make the assessments better doesn't mean that then you're against testing either. Like
Absolutely.
those things are true. We should want these to be better.
This has been a really incredible conversation. So for our educators listening on your commute, first, you're going to have a little bit of time without us as we get ready for season 2. But thank you for following along for as much of the season as you've joined us for. As always, we will end our last episode of season 1 with 3 tiers of action if you want to get involved. Our first, obviously, just know something. So thank you for listening today. You can use this information in how you approach your own classroom instruction, the way your school is currently preparing for any assessment. And just, there's always power in being better informed. And there's always another step you can go. Even myself working in this policy, I'm learning and getting deeper into topics every single day. I learned a lot today in our conversation with Anne. And so I think always just getting that knowledge for ourselves is a great step. And if that's all you have the capacity for right now, then it is more than enough. Thank you for joining us. And I'll let Rebecca do our step too.
Absolutely. And if let's be real, this is a hot topic. We're getting into testing season, which the fact that we even call it testing season is a whole other thing. I know when I was in elementary schools, this was a hot time of year because you had to convince kids to come in every day. And we were bribing them a lot. So, this is a big time. This will be a big topic of conversation in the coming weeks. So, feel free to share this episode, but also share what you've learned. I think, it's so helpful to have Anne to talk through the nuances here. And I think, like Jen said, I learned a lot as well. So hopefully you all did too, and learn things that you can share with your colleagues.
And our last step, if this is the one for you, if you're fired up, you're ready to take on assessment, like Anne said before, there's so many things you can do, starting in your own school building, working with other educators to advocate for your own testing culture in your building. It could be powerful. Going to the district, figuring out, I think the first thing, where the issue that you're seeing in your classroom or in the testing culture in your state is coming from. Is it a state issue? Is it a district decision? But like we've talked about before, there's so many ways to advocate there. This is one where there are groups, like Anne said, that you can join that actually help shape assessment. There's groups that help shape decisions that districts make around assessment. There are hearings and there are places that you can show up and advocate. This is absolutely a space we need more educator voice. And if this is the one for you, then I think, like I said, school building level, district level, state level, there are ample opportunities to be heard and to mobilize other educators around this issue. So yeah, like please get involved. If this is the one that has left you ready to go, like we need more educators at the table talking about assessment in this way, and we welcome it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we
thank you.
More assessment nerds. So
yeah, I was gonna say, call up. We'll talk to you about it. You can call us. Yeah.
you, Anne, for coming. Thank you for sharing your expertise. I don't know if we can fully express how lucky we are to get to work with you. Really, truly, because one, you're great, but also two, you're just like such an expert, and I learn from you every day on this. So like so much gratitude to you, but more importantly, so much gratitude to our educators. We stand with you all the time, every day, and in between season 1 and season 2, we'll keep fighting. This is a dream team at All for Ed right here. The three of us are leading a lot of this work at our organization, and we'll keep doing that work for you all, and you all keep showing up for your kids every day.
And in this break, please remember to send in any of your burning education policy questions via email, via Blue Sky, via our any of our channels, and see if we can take them on in season 2. We'd love to hear from you.